Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about job hunting, starting and running a business, and building wealth, all the financial aspects of life. So today is our monthly, Economic Echoes, our last one for 2025. And we're going to be, as I always do, breaking down the current economic data, that at least the data that we have, and talking about how this might affect the decisions that we make for ourselves and our family members, the people for whom we're responsible. So let's jump right into things. And wait a minute, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to start off, as I typically do, talking about inflation. And as you may know, the Consumer Price Index published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics hasn't been updated since the September numbers anyway, since October. And I found this other index called the Trueflation U.S. Inflation Index that appears to be at least as accurate as the CPI, maybe more so. Now, the interesting thing is it reports year-on-year inflation at 2.6%, up 0.02% from the previously reported time period. And pardon me. So, and it reports that, and it says that the BLS is reporting a 3% rate. I assume that's based on the last time the Consumer Price Index was published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But in any event, you can see that the Trueflation Index is considerably lower than the CPI, almost 0.5%. And as a result, that would tend to indicate that inflation is better under control than how the government is perceiving it. And if you look at the chart for the last year, okay, most of which the current administration has been in office, so you can see that it is down a little bit from the high of the year. The high of the year was a little over 3%. Okay, so it's down right now to 2.6% as of yesterday. And at one point, it was down as low as 1.22%, okay, in April. So the inflation rate went way down until April, and it's been building back up since then. Now, it's interesting to note that one of the things that happened in April is the tariff regime was imposed. And so, inflation seems to have gone up anywhere from roughly 0.5% to 1.5% since then. Is that only attributable to the tariffs? Almost for sure not. There are lots of factors that go into what causes inflation, but it could be partly due to the tariffs. So we'll have to see how that plays out. There is a decision pending from the Supreme Court on the constitutionality of the president imposing tariffs without the direct consent of Congress. We'll have to see how that plays out. So digging down this a little bit. Oh, no, I don't have access to that. Okay, so let's look at the composition now of various categories. So, or the composition of the inflation index, looking at different categories. So, the rate of inflation on food and beverages, these non-alcoholic food and beverages, I should say, I'm sorry, food and non-alcoholic beverages. So it's 1.3% or half of the overall rate of inflation. Okay, so food costs have the rate at which food costs have been increasing has slowed significantly from the beginning of the year, where it was over 4%. For much of the year, it was around the 3 to 3.5% range. So the rate at which food prices are increasing has declined quite a bit this year. Hopefully, that will give us all some relief. In terms of housing, so again, you can see housing, it has cooled somewhat. It's currently at a little over 1%. Okay. And that's down by half from the beginning of the year. Although you can see it's been bouncing in the range of about 0.5% to 1.5% for most of this year. So we're kind of at the mid range. But nonetheless, a 1, or in this case, a 1.17% inflation rate in housing, or 1.15% inflation rate for housing, not particularly significant. And again, that should, as wages catch up, hopefully wages are increasing at a higher rate than um, excuse me, than the rate of inflation. So we'll start to feel like we're catching up. I want to go back to one thing, and that's, you notice down here, relative importance. So food and non-alcoholic beverages make up a little bit more than 15% uh, of of um, of the of the factors that go into determining the overall inflation rate. So that's pretty significant. Housing is a little over 23%. Okay. Now, in a place like California, housing is going to be a higher percentage. But so this is looking at, nationwide. Okay, let's look at transportation. Transportation makes up almost 20%, and it is currently at about a little under 2%. That's down by half from the beginning of this year, but still pretty significant. Okay, so it again, the rate at which the cost of transportation is increasing has slowed significantly from the beginning of the year, but it's still, of the various factors, it's still pretty high, especially given that it makes up almost 20% of the overall inflation rate. Utilities, on the other hand, this is an interesting one. Notice it was at around 9% the beginning of the year. It's now at almost 12%. So the rate at which electricity, et cetera, is increasing has gone up significantly. And look, for the period from March through July, it was, essentially 0 to 1%. It's gone way up. So the rate at which utilities are increasing is quite high. However, its relative importance is about 6%. And so even though it's increasing pretty rapidly, as an overall share of how it's in fact impacting our cost of living, it's pretty small. Okay, so that makes it perhaps a little bit easier to bear. Healthcare costs are basically on par today at about 3% with where they were the beginning of the year. They did spike in August, the sort of August period, and have since come back down again. Okay, and healthcare makes up about 8.5% of our overall cost of living. Now, obviously, these are averages, so for you, if you're young and healthy, so healthcare costs may have little or no influence or no impact on your your personal cost of living. Okay. And so, but in any event, 3% is a pretty significant rate, a little under 3%. Okay. And if you're older like me, and not in good health, which overall, thankfully, I am, so healthcare costs may make up more than 9%, and therefore they have a larger impact on your cost of living. Okay, household and daily items. These are like supplies, furnishings, equipment. You can see they started out the year at about 2.7%. They are now double that, actually more than double that, at almost 5.9%. And they've been going up pretty steadily since about late May or mid-May. Now, this is something that I think is probably influenced by tariffs quite a bit, because many of these household durable and daily use items formerly came, or well, not formally, come from, and probably still do come from China, Vietnam. In other words, they're imported, and so the tariffs would increase their prices. So the thing about tariffs is, in some cases, importers and suppliers have essentially absorbed the cost of the tariffs by lowering their profit margins. And I think that that's probably what you saw in this period. They went up a little bit in sort of the July to October period, but now I think they're looking, to pass the costs of those tariffs on to consumers, and that's why we're seeing a cost increase of almost 6%. Now, as a share of cost of living, they're only a little over 7%. Nonetheless, 7% is not insignificant, and a 6% inflation rate is high. Okay, alcohol and tobacco started the year at a little over 3%. They're now at a little over 4%. But you can see for most of the year, they've kind of bounced around the 2 to 4% range. So, not I think a particularly significant change year over year. They only make up 2% of our cost of living. Unless you're someone like me, like I do a show where I mix a cocktail every week. So they may make up a little bit more of my cost of living. But in any event, while the inflation rate is high at over 4%, for most of us, the share in our cost of living is very low. So the increase in alcohol and tobacco costs is probably not a big driver of lack of being able to buy what we want. Okay, clothing. So again, you see that it started the year at about 2.5%. It's coming in now at more than double that, of a 5.25%, essentially. And you can see it's been going up steeply since September. Now, clothing, and by the way, it was getting lower until the middle of March, and then it spiked, and then it went down again, and then it spiked back up. Now, clothing is also something, a lot of clothing is imported into this country. Whether it's high-end or low-end clothing doesn't really matter. Very little of the clothes we buy, are made in the United States. Let me correct something here. You notice there was deflation in clothing go until the end of March. Clothing prices were declining by over 3%, and then they went back up again. And then they in September they deflated again, but now they're in inflation territory. So clothing is something that is impacted by tariffs as well, whether it's very cheap garments that are made in places like Malaysia, India, China, or expensive garments that are made in places like Germany, Italy. All of those are not the United States, and so their garments are being tariffed. Now, I was talking to one of the people at an Italian high-end clothing store called Eleventy, and I was asking him how are tariffs affecting their business, and he said that they, meaning the leadership of Eleventy, made the decision to absorb the tariffs and keep prices pretty much where they're at. Now, this is a luxury clothing store, and so their prices are pretty high. To give you an example, an unconstructed sports coat, and you're talking about $2,400. Okay, so a store like that can afford to absorb the cost of the tariffs. So while they might have made $1,000 or $1,200 on that jacket before, maybe now they make only $800, but that's still $800. That's still pretty hefty profit to make on one item. And so higher end clothing stores maybe have been able to absorb some or all of the impact of tariffs, but lower end clothing stores, H&M, that sort of level. So margins are much thinner. Number one, even if they're keystoning, which means that they're manufacturing or buying a garment for, let's say, $20 and they're selling it for $40. Keystoning means they're selling it for twice their cost to produce or acquire the garment. You can see if they're selling a garment for $40, but $20 is their gross profit, there's still not a lot of money there to pay tariffs. And so while on a percentage basis it might work out the same, but if you were getting $20 per garment before tariffs and now you're getting only maybe 12, okay, so that leaves a lot less money to pay for overhead and all the other expenses for running your business. And so you're more likely to pass on those costs to your customers. And I think that's at least part of what we're seeing here with the rise in the cost of clothing and footwear. Okay, next. And by the way, clothing makes up 4% roughly of cost of living. So it is a relatively small part, but nonetheless, an almost over 5% inflation rate, very high. Okay, communications. So started the year actually deflating. It spiked up for a while, but now it is at essentially the same deflation rate, about 0.5%, as it started the year at. It started the year at about -3%. Now it's deflating faster than that, -4 or 5%. So, and communications make up a little over 3%. So not a big impact on our cost of living. And even at its height, it was maybe inflating at about 1%, and at one point it was deflating at over 1.5%, but not a significant factor, I think, in our cost of living. Education, okay, started the year at an inflation rate of almost 3%, got as high as 3.5%. It's now at about 2.4%, so it's declined a little bit year over year. You can see it's been pretty volatile. The low is about 1.25%. The high is about 3.5%. However, overall, given the small impact on the cost of living that education costs have, about 2.33%, so a rate even on the little bit on the higher side of 2.4%, probably not causing a lot of difficulties in terms of the cost of living. Now, that of course depends on if you have 2 or 3 kids in college. So it's likely that the relative importance of education costs are much higher for you, and you may be feeling a squeeze as a result of the 2.4% increase in costs more acutely than someone like me who has, zero education costs. Okay. Finally, recreation and culture has been on a pretty steady increase since the beginning of the year. It did drop initially in January, February, but since the middle of February, it's been pretty consistently on an upwards trajectory. Right now, the current rate is over 3%. That's up from about 2/3 of, or I guess, 0.8% a year ago. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is recreation and culture makes up over 5.5% of our cost of living. So this would be things, movies, plays, sporting events, etc. I will say I was shocked at the cost just to park at I think it's, what is it called, Crypto Arena or wherever. I went and saw a football game earlier this year. The cost to park for just that one event was, I believe, $175. Okay, that's now a business associate had invited me, so I didn't have to pay for the ticket. But I was really surprised at the cost of parking. I'd never pay. That's the most I've paid for parking in my life. But look, for people who are really love sporting events, for example, there's there's not much elasticity in demand. People are going to go and cheer on their favorite team, right? And so I think that's part of what you're seeing here is whether it's movie theaters or whatever, they're looking to push prices if they can, and they're being successful. Okay, so if you're a big consumer of recreation and culture, you may be finding a bigger impact on what you can afford, beyond what amounts to about a 5.5% of your cost of living. And then finally, others. This is sort of think personal care products and that sort of stuff. So you can see that there's been a big drop here from over 3% to deflation of 1/3%. Okay. Now, this is interesting because a lot of personal care products also are imported. And you can see they've been pretty consistently in the 2 to 3% range until mid-November. And in the last month, they've dropped from an inflation rate of 3.1% down to a deflation rate of 0.34%. That is a 3.5% drop in the last month. I've thought about this. I can't tell you why I think there's been such a big drop. This would be counterintuitive for products that are coming in from overseas where they're being tariffed. There's no reason to think that the ingredients that go into these kinds of things are less expensive. I can't think of an explanation. This could be an aberration in the data. But if you use a lot of personal care products, so presumably at this point you've seen not only a drop in the rate at which they're increasing, but you've actually seen prices declining. That's what deflation is. So again, depending on what are the actual things that you buy, okay, your experience of inflation could be changing significantly. Now, the sort of main drivers here, which are food and non-alcoholic beverages at 15%, housing at 23%, together that makes up 38%. Transportation makes up another roughly 20%, so we're at 58%, and utilities make up 6%. So together, these four make up about 2/3 of our cost of living. Most of us are probably not experiencing these at a significantly lower impact on our overall cost of living than about 2/3. Here in California, they're probably more than 2/3, or well, here in urban California, places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, where the cost of housing is very high, they could be, closer to making up 70% in a place where the cost of living, housing is much lower. Nebraska, okay, maybe it's only 55%, but still somewhere between half and about 2/3 of our cost of living is made up by these top four items here. And you can see they are all increasing at somewhere between 1 to 2%, and with utilities being the biggest increase. And so I think if you're feeling kind of strapped, it's because despite the fact that inflation is down pretty significantly for most of these since the beginning of the year, prices are still increasing overall. The inflation, the rate at which they're increasing has slowed, but they are still increasing. And so I think that is what's driving the sense that people are feeling strapped. Let's take a quick break, and I'll be right back. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. So we're back at our monthly Economic Echo show, looking at the economic data and talking about how it may affect us. So I just talked about the inflation rate. Now let's go on to employment. Okay, so let's look first at the ADP employment numbers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics did publish some figures. I'll talk about those in a moment. But for November 2025, according to ADP, private employers shed 32,000 jobs. Okay, so we're still at slightly under 135,000 people employed in private employment. By industry, you can see the biggest employers are well, this is let's see. Okay, so yeah, so education and health services, 25, almost 26,000. Professional and business services, about 22.5. Leisure and hospitality, about 17.5. Manufacturing, about 13 million. Financial activities, about 9 million. Construction, about 8.5 million. Other services, about 5 million. Information services, about 3 million. And then natural resources and mining are at about a little under 2 million. Okay, so you can see the breakdown there, and you know how these you know where these sit as of I think it's actually November. It's saying October 2025 here, but I think it's actually November. Okay, so that's the breakdown by industry, by the size of the firm. Okay, so 1 to 19. Well, actually, let's go down. Let's look at the region first, then we'll look at size. So in terms of regions, the South Atlantic employs the most with about 26.5 million. The Pacific next with about 23 million. The East, North Central, about 19.5. Mid-Atlantic, 17.5. West, South, Central, 16, and on down from there. Okay, so you can see where most of the jobs are concentrated. Okay, now this is, I think, interesting here. So you'll notice that small firms lost about 120,000 jobs, okay? 1 to 19 employees and 20 to 49 employees. So the smallest firms lost 120,000 jobs. Mid-sized firms, 50 to 249 and 254.99, actually gained over 50,000 jobs, and large firms with 500 or more employees gained 39,000. So what's going on in the labor market is small firms are shedding jobs faster than mid and large firms are gaining them. And that's why we saw an overall decline of 32,000 jobs. Okay, where are the changes happening? Well, natural resources and mining, we saw an 8,000 job increase, whereas construction went down 9,000 and manufacturing 18,000. Okay, those are in the goods ends of the equation. In the services end, trade, transportation, utilities went up 1,000. But, and here's where you see the big losers of jobs, Information down 20,000, financial activities 9, professional and business services dropped 26,000. Health and education and health services went up 33,000. Month after month, year after year, this has been the big driver of job growth. Even though we're looking at private sector jobs, a lot of health services jobs are driven by government spending because Medicare and Medicaid programs make up such a large source of funding for healthcare and therefore healthcare jobs. Now, leisure and hospitality jobs went up 13,000 and other services went down by 4,000 jobs. So that's ADP's picture. Not a strong employment picture, which is, I think, why we saw the Federal Reserve drop interest rates this just, I believe it was last week. Now let's look at the paychecks small business index. This is looking again just at small businesses. So now these are the numbers for October. Okay, the index is at 99.27. It dropped by almost 0.8%, which means that job growth, well, there's actually job shrinkage in small businesses, which matches what we saw with the ADP survey. Now, let's look at the regional performance. So in the West had the worst. It saw a drop of 1.34. Midwest next worst with a drop of a little over 1. The Southeast dropped a little over 3/4. The South was the strongest, but still a drop of 0.25%. Okay, so overall, the number of jobs shrank across the country for small businesses. Let's look at the state by state performance. So a few states, actually they're across the region. So North Carolina saw job growth, so did Ohio slightly, so did Arizona a little less slightly, and Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Texas. Georgia didn't quite make it to not shrinking or growing, but then the rest of the states on this list you can see all saw jobs shrinking. And what's more notable is this blue dot here shows you what the situation was for the prior year at this time. So the fact is, while North Carolina and Arizona and Pennsylvania and a few other states are doing better than last year, most of the states are like Ohio are doing about the same or worse from last year. So the employment picture is showing showing quite a bit of deterioration. Now, looking at metro areas, the only metro area to show job growth this is for small business in October, was Phoenix. It had slight job growth. Miami was just slightly below, holding its own. All the rest dropped. Okay, Denver, for example, they're at an index of about 95.5, 4.5% decline in jobs. And you'll also notice that only Phoenix and Tampa are doing better this year than last year. And that, again, it's important to look at because it's showing that overall in the last year, employment prospects have gotten worse. Okay, industry performance. So again, we're seeing a similar trend. The only place where jobs are growing is education and health services. Everywhere else, they're shrinking. And again, more to the point, in only 2 sectors, trade, transportation, and utilities and manufacturing, are we seeing an improvement from last year in terms of job growth. All of the rest are worse off this year than last year. So we're not seeing a great jobs picture, which again I think is why the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates. Okay, now let's go back to government data. Okay, and this is looking at the civilian unemployment rate. It ticked up in November to 4.6%. We don't have an October number, but in September it was at 4.4%. We always look at this in relation to I'm going up on the name, the labor force participation rate. Okay, but real quickly, let's look at men. Okay, for men 20 and over, it ticked. Wait, I think it's. Oh no, they don't have the breakdown, do they? I don't see the break. Oh yeah, okay. So for men 20 and over, unemployment was essentially unchanged. For women 20 and over, a little hard to get this. So also essentially unchanged. And for teenagers, September it was at 13.2, and for November it went up to 16.3. So only teens as an age group saw a significant change in the unemployment rate. Okay, now let's look at demographics. Oops. Okay, so for white Americans, November, they're at 3.9% versus 3.8% of September. Not a big change. For Black Americans, September saw 7.5, November at 8.3. That's a very significant change. Again, we need to look at the participation rates before we draw any conclusions. For Asian Americans, the rate in September 4.4, changed, no change since September. And finally, for Hispanics, November 5%, and that's a 0.5% drop from September. So teens are doing significantly worse. Hispanics are doing better. All the rest of the groups were essentially unchanged September through from September to November. Now let's look at labor force participation rate. Okay, so the labor force participation rate was 62.5% in November, up a little bit from 62.4, and so there's been, overall very little change there, which is and there was very little change in the unemployment rate. So this sort of aggregated picture of employment hasn't changed much. But let's look at participation rate for men 20 and older. Okay, it was at 7.2. It was unchanged from September to November. For women, we're looking at 58.7 in November from 50. Okay, no change from September, right? And for teens, okay, so the labor force participation rate in September was 36.3, and it was the same for November. Okay, so the drop in employment among teens is due to fewer teens having jobs. Okay, it's not because more teens went into the market looking for jobs and therefore caused an increase in the employment rate. In the unemployment rate, I should say. Okay, white Americans, the job participation rate slightly changed, but not particularly material. For Black Americans, the participation rate. Okay, so Black Americans saw a 1% increase in labor force participation rate, which would tend to drive the unemployment rate higher. Now, it's not good to see a higher employment rate per se, but the reason that is that more Blacks are entering the workforce, that is a good thing, okay? More people seeking employment and hopefully finding it overall is a good thing, both for the people finding jobs, but also for the economy as a whole. For Asian Americans, November 66. Okay, so they saw a 0.7% increase in labor force participation, even as their unemployment rate remains steady. So Asians have done pretty well over the last 2 months. And then finally, Hispanic Americans or Latinos, okay, essentially almost unchanged in terms of their labor force participation. And so the fact that their unemployment rate dropped 0.5% means that Latinos, Hispanics are doing very, very well in terms of employment. Okay, now let's look at employment by industry. Okay, so this will mirror some of the things that we looked at in the ADP numbers. And you can see construction went up. We saw that. Education, private education, health services went up. Okay, that's what we saw. Okay, the numbers are different. If you recall, for ADP, they said that job growth in education and health services was 33,000. The Bureau of Labor Statistics saying it was 65,000 new jobs. Okay, that's a big difference between the two. In theory, the BLS numbers are more comprehensive, but in practice, all of these labor surveys, job surveys, they're because of the difficulty in getting data, it's very hard to say how accurate they are. Okay, now here's a big one. The BLS is saying leisure and hospitality lost 12,000 jobs, whereas ADP was saying that they gained 13,000 jobs. Okay, so we're obviously variations between the two. Which one is correct and which one isn't? It's tempting to assume that the government figures are more accurate, but given how they're compiled and how over the last 10 plus years, more and more employers have not contributed data. So it's hard to make the case that the BLS numbers are inherently more accurate than ADP's. Okay, government net jobs down 5,000. So you can see the biggest gainers, according to the BLS, are construction, business and professional services, and private health and education. The biggest losers are leisure and hospitality, transportation, warehousing, government, manufacturing, and mining and logging. So very different picture between the two. Looking for a moment at the 12-month picture, again, this is what we've seen for the last couple of years at least. Private education and health services jobs have grown by 775,000 because these jobs are largely supported by government funding. That's why perennially you see that's where job growth is. Okay, now this is a turnaround from a year ago. A year ago, the number of government jobs was increasing. Overall, they're decreasing. Now, what you're going to see is there was a drop of 265,000 federal jobs since President Trump took office, whereas and state governments have also shed 16,000 jobs. Local governments have partially offset that with 161,000 jobs. So overall, government jobs have dropped by about 120,000, and that's due largely to the federal government shedding jobs. Okay, so now let's look. We have 3 more things to look at here. I think we're going to be on time. Okay, let's look at housing, the change in housing costs. So I always look at California first. Median sales price year over year went down 0.25%, not a big change. Number of houses sold dropped by over 4%, and median days on market was up by 10%. And you can see, that over the last, year or so, let's look for here December. Okay, prices in California are up a little bit, but they went up and they've come back down and they're continuing down. Nonetheless, a median sales price of over $800,000. Housing is expensive here in California. Okay, 10 top. Okay, here we go. Housing supply. Okay, so number of homes sold went down almost 2% year over year. Number of newly listed homes went down over 15% year over year. And that's I think people are seeing, hey, I'm not seeing a lot of price growth. I'm not going to sell my house, or because I don't want to sell into a buyer's market. Okay, and then finally, homes sold above list price, roughly a third, which is down by 5.5% from a year ago. Homes sold with price drops, about 23%, a 3% increase. So you are seeing the market here in California is shifting slightly in favor of buyers. Okay, but the sales to list price, okay, overall homes are selling a little bit below list price, but not a whole lot. Okay, and I always like to look at this last. In California, you can see where people are moving from California. There's no doubt about that. That continues. Where are and also states like New York. So any state in blue is where people are leaving. The darker the blue, the more people leaving. California had the most people. New York second, Illinois third, and then there's a number of kind of light blue states where either there was a small out migration, or it was basically flat. Like New Mexico actually saw zero net migration. Okay. On the other hand, the darker the sort of orangish brown, the more people moving there. The two most popular destinations, Florida and Arizona, followed by North Carolina, Tennessee, and South Carolina. Okay. And then, Idaho, Maine, Michigan, Wisconsin, places like that. Okay. Places like Utah, where you see this sort of tannish color. Interestingly enough, the statistics there are similar to New Mexico. There was net migration was essentially zero. Where are people moving to? You can see the cities here. Several of them are in Florida. That's been the case all year long. And where are they leaving? The big cities in California, New York, DC, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, etc. Okay, so now let's look at another market. Let's look at Omaha, Nebraska. I always like to look at Omaha, Nebraska, because it's so different than California. Okay, median sales price $275,000, essentially flat year over year. Okay, number of homes sold 341, down almost 15%. Median days on market up 8% to 26. Okay, so the market is pretty strong. You see right here an 86. So it is pretty strong. Okay. Sale to list price, number of houses. Homes sold above list price, a little over 20%. That's down 3%. Homes sold with price drops, 35%, up 3%. So overall, it's a buyer's market. Because homes are selling about 2.5% below list price. Okay. And so where are people moving to Omaha from? And you can see it's largely from the usual suspects: Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle. This looks like DC. This is Boston. And interestingly enough, from Dallas. Okay, that's the places from where they're inbound. And you can see the numbers of people leaving Omaha pretty small. People tend to like it there. Okay, and next let's look at the rental market. Here we go. Okay, so here you get a kind of a summary of the rental market and sort of average rents. Let's look at LA, my hometown. Okay, month over month change 0, year over year change down $50. Okay, and you can see the market is warm, but by no means hot. You can see there's a lot, it's a higher end rental market. Okay, and okay, so that gives you an idea there. And then let's go back and let's look at Omaha. Okay, so Omaha, the average monthly rent went down $25, but it is up $56 from year over year. And you can see it's a moderately priced rental market compared to Los Angeles. The conditions there are cool, okay, which means if you're thinking of moving to Omaha and renting, you're in good shape, okay? So, by the way, as I've always try and mention, all of these links will be in the show notes, so you can look at your particular situation and make decisions based on the places in which you are interested. I just want to cover one more set of data before we end here, and that is the survey of consumers done by the University of Michigan. Paul Donovan, the chief economist at UBS, he poo-poos these numbers quite a bit. If you only listen to one business podcast each day, you should listen to Paul Donovan at UBS. It usually lasts for no more than about 3 minutes. He has the drollest sense of humor in the business reporting world, but he tells it like it is. He also gives an international perspective, so you get a sense of what's really going on across the world, not just the United States. Okay, so the index of consumer sentiment in December went up a little bit from November, 4.5% positive change. Current economic conditions, though, declined a little bit, almost 1%, 50.7 down from 51.1. So people are not feeling great about the current situation. But this is interesting. Index of consumer expectations went up from 51 to 55, an 8% increase. So people are expecting things to get better. And that's important. Pardon me. Now, year over year, things are still much lower than they're much lower now. So overall, people are more pessimistic than they were a year ago. Okay, some of the shine has come off, the current administration, but at least for in the short term here, we are seeing some improvement overall in the outlook for the future. Okay, so what does this mean for you? Number one, I say this every month. Look at your specific situation. Take 10, 15, 20 minutes, use the links in the show notes, and look at the data with respect to how you live your life so that you can make decisions that are right for you based on data tailored to how you and your family live your life. That's number one. Number two, overall, inflation has moderated somewhat from a year ago, okay? But it's still higher, certainly, than the Fed wants to see it. Whether we take the Truflation's number of 2.6% or the Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI at 3%, those are higher than the Federal Reserve wants to see them, and they are price increases. They're real. If you're feeling pinched, it's likely for good reason, because prices are continuing to increase. the idea that prices are going to decrease, which is how you hear it talked about generally in the media, that is extremely unlikely to happen outside of a recession. Okay, to see actual price deflation, lowering of prices, probably not going to see that. Hopefully, what we will see going forward is a significant reduction in the inflation rate, hopefully down under 2%, maybe in the 0 to 1% range. That's, to my mind, the ideal rate. And the reason I say that is because to actually see a deflation rate is not good for most of us, especially, for example, if you have a home mortgage, because what that means is you're paying how you're paying back your mortgage becomes more costly. So the value of the dollar is dropping, and in essence, you're having to pay what amounts to more dollars to pay that. You're paying that loan off with dollars that are uh, um, uh, more expensive than they were before. That's why, generally speaking, the Fed tries to avoid deflation, because it makes paying back debts more expensive. Okay, but it would be great to see an inflation rate in the 0 to 1% range, which would be, kind of essentially, no increases or only tiny increases. That way, wages have an opportunity to catch up and move beyond price increases, and therefore we can gain some ground in terms of what it costs us to live. Okay, so that's number 2. And number 3, be skeptical about the reporting you hear in terms of economics and data and prices, all of that. Anytime you're hearing a soundbite about it, there's always data underlying that. And most economic data today can be manipulated to fit whatever perspective the person talking about it wants to give it. And so, if you're hearing, if you're listening to someone whose perspective you generally agree with, uh, and they give you an economic perspective that's what you want to hear, be skeptical of that, because the truth may be, I don't want to say that they're lying, but how you would view the data might be different than how this person reporting it views it. And even though you generally agree with them. Okay, so you just have to be really careful about how you absorb data on the economy so that you can make sound decisions for you and your family. All right. So I thank you very much for joining me with at this month's Economic Echoes, last one for 2025. Let's see. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. is my 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show, Jiggers' Place. We'll sit back and have a cocktail and a schmooze. And then, of course, next week I will be back for the full regular slate of shows. So I thank you very much for joining me. I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Signing off, Marie, darling, you are my belle.